All right, buckle up. We're diving straight into the deep end. The digital screams hit us like a tidal wave. 1 second, the simulated hurricane on the main display was a manageable Category 3, a digital inconvenience for the pampered C-suite of global petrologistics. The next, the carefully crafted chaos dissolved into a far more terrifying reality. Blank screens, flashing red warnings, and the chilling silence of a severed lifeline. "Primary link severed," the automated system shrieked, the digital voice echoing the knot tightening in my gut. Then, a beat later, the truly impossible happened. "Secondary link severed." Dave, my perpetually wired network engineer, looked like he'd just seen a ghost. A digital ghost, naturally. "Total physical disconnect. Both? That's not statistically probable. Those lines are buried, man. Separated by what, 20 feet of dirt and a misplaced sprinkler head?" He spun in his ergonomic chair, the wheels squeaking in protest against the sudden violence of his movement. His fingers danced across his keyboard, a desperate ballet of diagnostics. Jenna, my second-in-command, and the only reason Aegis Command hadn't devolved into a caffeine-fueled tech bro free-for-all, was already on the phone. Her usual unflappable demeanor had a hairline crack running through it. Her voice, though still professional, was edged with a palpable tension. "Alex, the storm? In the Gulf?" She paused, listening intently to the voice on the other end. Her eyes, usually sharp and focused, widened in disbelief. It just jumped to a Category 5, and the trajectory, it's shifted hard west, directly towards Houston. They were trying to reach us. Their primary comms are already down." My lukewarm, burnt coffee suddenly tasted like ash. A simulated disaster was one thing. We could rewind, analyze, and tweak the variables until the digital executives felt like they'd earned their exorbitant salaries. This was real. Billions of dollars, thousands of jobs, potentially lives, all hanging in the digital balance, and we were deaf and dumb. "Okay, Dave," I said, my voice betraying none of the ice forming in my veins. "Run a local diagnostic. Trace the physical layer. I want to know exactly what's showing as disconnected." Even as I said it, I knew. This wasn't a random outage. This felt deliberate, malicious even. And a nasty little tendril of suspicion was already snaking its way through my brain, pointing squarely at the bane of my increasingly miserable existence. The Whispering Pines Estates Homeowners Association. Specifically, its newly elected rule-obsessed president, a woman whose name tasted like vinegar in my mouth, Carol Peterson. "Narrating?" Dave stammered, his fingers flying across his keyboard. "Right. Local network seems fine. Internal systems are nominal, but yeah, no external connectivity whatsoever. It's like someone literally cut the wires." "Like someone literally cut the wires," I repeated, the sarcasm thick enough to spread on toast. I pushed back from my command console, the expensive leather groaning under my weight. "Jenna, keep trying to raise global petrologistics on any available channel. Satellite phone, ham radio, smoke signals, I don't care, just get through." I strode out of the cool, dimly lit war room and into the harsh glare of the suburban afternoon. Whispering Pines Estates. More like screaming bureaucracy borough. My office, a converted standalone commercial building nestled uncomfortably amongst the faux Tudor McMansions, was perpetually under the judgmental gaze of its residents. Apparently, a business that occasionally had unmarked vans arriving at odd hours wasn't in keeping with the neighborhood's aesthetic. My gaze fell on the meticulously manicured lawn, the kind of aggressively green carpet that screamed water waste. The utility markers, little flags denoting buried gas, water, and, critically, fiber optic lines, were still fluttering innocently in the gentle breeze. I followed the path they traced, my steps quickening with a growing sense of dread. and then I saw it. A small patch of disturbed soil. The fresh dirt, a stark contrast to the uniform green. A shallow trench, just long enough to expose two brutally severed orange cables, thick as garden hoses. The fiber optic lines, our primary and redundant links to the digital world, lay there like eviscerated snakes. A few feet away, leaning on a garden shovel as if it were the most natural thing in the world to be wielding post-hole diggers at critical infrastructure, stood Carol Peterson. She was wearing pristine white gardening gloves and a smug expression that could curdle milk. The shovel gleamed in the sunlight. My jaw dropped. I think I actually said, "You've got to be kidding me," out loud to the empty suburban air. Carol straightened up, the smugness morphing into a self-righteous indignation that was her trademark. "Mr. My last name," she said, her voice tight with disapproval. "I trust you received my email?" "Your email?" I sputtered, my mind still trying to process the sheer audacity of the scene. "The one about the precise shade of gray of a buried utility cover? Carol, my internet just went down. As in, the multi-million-dollar disaster recovery company I run is now completely cut off from the world. Do you have any idea what kind of—" She held up a perfectly manicured hand, stopping me mid-rant. Bylaw 14, Section B, Paragraph 3, clearly states that all modifications to common ground landscaping must be pre-approved by the HOA board. Your newly installed fiber optic conduit cover, as I meticulously documented with photographic evidence, is in violation of this bylaw. A plastic plate, Carol. We're talking about a freaking plastic plate. The bylaws are the bylaws, mister. My last name. I issued a formal notification of non-compliance at 9:17 this morning, granting you a 60-minute window to rectify the violation. As you failed to do so, she gestured dramatically with the shovel. Corrective action was deemed necessary. I stared at her, dumbfounded. You cut my internet with a shovel because of the color of a piece of plastic buried under 6 inches of dirt? Rules are what separate us from the animals, mister. My last name, she declared, her voice rising in pitch. This is a community with standards, and you, with your blinking lights and your strange vans, have consistently shown a disregard for those standards. Carol, I said, trying to keep the rising panic from my voice. Do you understand that I run an emergency operations center? Right now, as we speak, there's a Category 5 hurricane bearing down on a major metropolitan area. My clients are relying on me to coordinate their disaster response. You've just effectively blinded and silenced me. Her expression remained stubbornly unmoved. Perhaps if you had adhered to the community guidelines, this unfortunate situation could have been avoided. I wanted to scream. I wanted to grab the shovel and plant petunias in her prize-winning azaleas. But I knew that would only escalate things further. Instead, I took a deep, steadying breath. Carol, I said, trying a different tack. This isn't about a gray plate anymore. This is about serious consequences. The consequences of violating the HOA covenants are clearly outlined in Appendix D, she retorted, completely unfazed. A series of escalating fines and ultimately legal action. Fines? I repeated, incredulous. We're talking about the potential collapse of a multi-billion-dollar logistics network, Carol. People could lose their livelihoods. This isn't about your stupid flower beds. My flower beds are perfectly lovely, thank you very much, she sniffed. And the bylaws regarding landscaping are very clear. I realized, with a sinking feeling, that I was dealing with a level of irrationality that was beyond my comprehension. Logic, reason, the potential for widespread economic disruption, none of it registered. To Carol, The most pressing crisis in the world was the aesthetic integrity of Whispering Pines Estates. "Fine," I said, my voice flat. "You've made your point. Now, if you'll excuse me, I have a planet to try and save." I turned and stalked back towards my building. The image of those severed cables burned into my retina. This wasn't just an inconvenience. This was an act of digital terrorism perpetrated with a garden tool and a misplaced sense of civic duty. Back in the ops room, the atmosphere was thick with tension. Jenna was pacing, her phone pressed to her ear, getting nothing but static. Dave was frantically checking backup systems, all of which relied on the now-deceased primary and secondary internet links. "Nothing, Alex," Jenna said, her voice tight with frustration. "It's like they've fallen off the face of the earth. Their internal comms are down, cell towers are overloaded. We're completely in the dark." "Okay," I said, trying to project an air of calm I definitely didn't feel. "Plan B. Jenna, call Gus at the ISP. Tell him we have a situation. Priority 1, emergency business service restoration. Tell him I don't care if he has to dig up the entire neighborhood. We need those lines back online." Jenna nodded grimly and started dialing. I watched her, my mind racing. Relying on Gus and the ISP felt like putting a Band-Aid on a severed artery. Carol, with her shovel and her unwavering belief in the sanctity of slightly different shades of gray, was a force of nature. A deeply, deeply annoying force of nature. A few minutes later, Jenna hung up, her expression grim. "Gus is on his way, but he said anything involving digging on HOA property is going to be a bureaucratic nightmare. He's had issues with them before." I closed my eyes briefly. Of course it wouldn't be easy. About 20 minutes later, a battered utility van with the faded logo of Reliable Fiber Solutions rumbled into the parking lot. A burly man in a mud-stained work shirt and a baseball cap climbed out, a tool belt slung low around his hips. This was Gus. He looked like a man who understood the language of copper and fiber, not the arcane dialect of HOA bylaws. Gus took one look at the sawn cables, lying exposed in their shallow graves, and let out a low whistle. "Damn," he said, shaking his head. "Someone really had it in for you. That's a clean cut. Looks almost professional." He hefted a pair of heavy-duty cable cutters. "All right, let's get this patched up. Where's the termination point?" Just as Gus bent down to examine the severed lines, a figure emerged from the direction of the HOA common area, her arms crossed imperiously across her chest. "Carol." "Excuse me," she called out, her voice sharp and demanding. "What do you think you're doing?" Gus straightened up, looking bewildered. I'm here to fix the internet." He gestured to the cables. "Someone had a little disagreement with their garden shears." "This is HOA common property," Carol declared, planting herself directly in Gus's path. "No work can be performed without prior written authorization from the board." Gus blinked, clearly not understanding the level of crazy he was dealing with. "Ma'am, with all due respect, someone cut their main fiber lines. They're a business. They need to get back online." Carol remained unmoved. She produced a thick, dog-eared 3-ring binder from somewhere. It was like she carried the damn thing everywhere. "The covenants, conditions, and restrictions of Whispering Pines Estates," she announced, holding it aloft like a sacred text. She flipped through the pages with an air of immense importance. Section 7, subsection D, paragraph 12, clearly outlines the procedure for any excavation or modification to common ground. A written application must be submitted no less than 14 business days prior to the commencement of work. Gus stared at her, his mouth slightly agape. He looked at me, a silent plea for help in his eyes. "Carol," I interjected, trying to keep the exasperation out of my voice. This is an emergency. We don't have 14 business days. We have a major client facing a catastrophic event right now. Rules are rules, mister. My last name, she insisted, tapping the binder with a perfectly manicured nail. And unauthorized digging is strictly prohibited. Furthermore, she added, her eyes narrowing, I do not see the required notice of intent to perform utility work posted in the designated area. There's a hurricane about to flatten Houston, Carol. Who cares about a damn notice? Order, she snapped. There will be order in this community, and until the proper procedures are followed, no work will be done. She stood her ground, a small suburban barricade against the flow of crucial digital information. Dude, Gus muttered to me, his voice low. Is she for real? I've had squirrels chew through lines that put up less of a fight than this. I sighed. Unfortunately, Gus, she is very, very real. Carol, sensing she was being discussed, puffed out her chest. I will not be intimidated by your attempts to circumvent the established community guidelines. She reached for her phone. I am feeling threatened by this unauthorized activity. I am calling the authorities. And just like that, the situation went from absurd to potentially involving law enforcement, all because of a disagreement over the proper paperwork for fixing a deliberately severed internet cable during a national-level emergency. My life, I realized, had become a particularly bad sitcom episode. A short while later, a police cruiser, the kind with the slightly dented bumper and the faint smell of stale coffee, pulled up. Sergeant Davis, a man whose face suggested he had seen it all and was no longer particularly impressed by any of it, emerged from the driver's side. He was followed by a younger officer, Miller, who looked like he was still trying to figure out which end of his taser was the pointy one. Carol launched into her performance the moment they were within earshot, her voice trembling with outrage. Officer, thank goodness you're here. These men are attempting to trespass and perform unauthorized work on community property. I, as president of the HOA, have informed them of the bylaws, but they are refusing to comply and are being quite aggressive. She even managed to produce a few strategically placed tears. Miller, looking flustered, pulled out his notepad. All right, ma'am. Let's take it from the top. You say these gentlemen were trespassing? Davis, meanwhile, bypassed the theatrics and walked directly over to me and Gus. All right, fellas, he said, his voice calm and world-weary. Let's cut the melodrama. What's the real story here? I took a deep breath and explained, in the simplest terms I could manage, what Aegis Command was, the critical nature of our work, and the rather unique circumstances surrounding our sudden lack of internet access. So, Davis summarized, his gaze flicking between the severed cables and Carol's dramatic sobbing. This lady cut your internet line because of a landscaping violation? Essentially, yes, I confirmed. And now, with a Category 5 hurricane about to hit one of our client's main facilities, we're completely offline. Davis ran a hand over his balding head. Ma'am, he said, turning to Carol, do you understand the potential seriousness of this situation? The serious situation is the blatant disregard for our community's rules and regulations, Carol insisted, brandishing her binder again. If we allow one violation, where does it end? Chaos. Anarchy. Davis sighed, the sound heavy with the weight of countless neighborhood disputes. He turned back to me. Look, mister, my last name. Technically, she's right. It's HOA property. It's a civil matter. We can't force her to let your guy dig without a court order. But she deliberately damaged our property, I protested, gesturing to the sawn cables. That's a potential criminal charge, Davis conceded. But that'll take time to investigate. And even if charges are filed, it doesn't magically reconnect your internet. He gave me a look of grim sympathy. Honestly, this is beyond my pay grade. You might need to talk to your lawyer. And just like that, the forces of law and order were stymied by the iron will of an HOA president, and the arcane language of suburban covenants. Davis and Miller eventually left, Davis offering a muttered, "Good luck with this," as he climbed back into the cruiser. Carol stood there, a small, victorious general surveying her conquered territory. Gus just shook his head, his tool belt silent and useless. Back inside Aegis Command, the mood was bordering on despair. Jenna was still getting nowhere with global petrologistics. Dave was nervously pacing, muttering about network redundancy and disaster recovery. Ironic, considering our current predicament. "Their backup generators are failing due to flooding," Jenna reported, her voice flat. "The mobile command unit is stuck in gridlock miles outside the city. We have absolutely no contact, Alex. They're completely on their own." I looked at the clock on the wall. Every second ticking by was potentially costing our client millions. My carefully constructed plans, our state-of-the-art technology, all rendered useless by a woman with a shovel and an overdeveloped sense of community pride. "Okay," I said, my voice cutting through the gloom. I took a deep breath, a slow smile, more of a grimace really spreading across my face. "Plan C, negotiating with the shovel-wielding lunatic, has clearly failed. Plan B, relying on the local constabulary, has also failed spectacularly. It's time," I announced, "for Plan A." Dave stopped pacing and stared at me, his eyes wide. "Plan A? I thought fixing the cable was Plan A?" "Oh, Dave," I said, shaking my head. "Plan A is you never have to deal with people like Carol Peterson in the first place." I turned to Jenna. "Call Marco. Tell him it's a Code 1 deployment. I need the KSAT package, now." Dave looked even more confused. "KSAT? What's that?" "Think of it as a slightly more robust solution than a piece of fiber optic cable," I said with a wry smile. I clapped Dave on the shoulder. "Dave, my friend, get your surprisingly agile posterior up to the roof. I need you to run power and data conduits from the server room to the roof access point. You've got, let's say, 5 minutes. Make it snappy." The bewilderment on Dave's face slowly morphed into a dawning understanding, then a surge of adrenaline. He scrambled towards the stairwell, muttering about coax cables and UPS backups. Jenna, her initial surprise giving way to focused efficiency, was already on the phone. The heavy atmosphere in the ops room began to lift, replaced by a frantic, purposeful energy. We were going off-grid, literally. A sleek, unmarked black van, the kind that always looks like it belongs to some shadowy government agency, screeched to a halt in the parking lot about 15 minutes later. A figure emerged from the driver's seat. Marco. He was dressed in all black, his movements fluid and efficient. He looked like he'd stepped straight out of a tech thriller. "Alex?" He greeted me with a grin. "Long time no see. What's the emergency? Rival nation-state trying to hack into Fort Knox? Corporate espionage gone wild?" "Worse," I said, gesturing towards Carol, who was now watching us with a mixture of suspicion and outrage from her front porch. "An HOA president." Marco didn't even blink. He just raised an eyebrow and nodded slowly. "Say no more." The back of the van opened, revealing a surprisingly compact but undeniably high-tech array of equipment. A self-aligning, portable satellite dish, about 4 feet in diameter, sat nestled amongst a collection of ruggedized cases containing modems, amplifiers, and a tangle of heavy-duty cables. It looked like something NASA had misplaced after a particularly ambitious picnic. "KSAT 1.2, Marco explained, hefting one of the cases. "Military-grade encryption, dedicated bandwidth. Not exactly your grandma's dial-up." Dave, looking slightly winded but clearly excited, met us at the roof access door. He'd already run the necessary power and data lines. The roof of Aegis Command, usually a boring expanse of gravel and HVAC units, was about to get a serious upgrade. The next few minutes were a blur of focused activity. Marco and I worked in practiced silence, bolting the dish to a reinforced mount, running cables, and connecting the various components. Dave, surprisingly handy with tools, helped secure everything. The air hummed with the low thrum of the satellite modem powering up. From below, a shrill voice pierced the relative quiet. Carol had apparently decided that a small gray plate was an affront to suburban sensibilities, but a full-blown satellite dish sprouting from the roof was an act of outright war. We could hear her shouting about property values and the visual blight on the neighborhood. Her phone was glued to her ear, no doubt reporting our illegal construction to every authority figure she could think of. Marco, oblivious to the suburban drama unfolding below, was hunched over his ruggedized laptop, his fingers flying across the keyboard. Powering up, initializing alignment sequence, hunting for Telstar 19V. Acquiring signal. Inside the ops room, Jenna's voice crackled over my radio earpiece, her tone urgent. Alex, I just got a fragmented message from their CEO. Backup systems failing faster than anticipated. They're losing critical data feeds. We have minutes, maybe seconds. Aligning. Peaking signal, Marco muttered, his brow furrowed in concentration. Almost there. Suddenly, Dave yelled, Hey, what's she doing? I looked over the edge of the roof. Carol, in a truly astonishing display of escalating madness, had located the heavy-duty power cable running from our backup generator to the building. She was standing on it, trying to yank it free. Ma'am, for the love of all that is holy, do not touch that cable, I yelled down, scrambling towards the roof access. By the time I reached her, she was red-faced and straining, the thick cable barely budging. I had to physically take her by the elbows and gently but firmly pull her away. Carol, I said, trying to keep my voice level despite the urge to scream. That cable powers our entire operation. Please, just step away. In that split second of distraction, Marco's voice, amplified by the roof's open space, boomed. We have lock, link established, full bandwidth. I looked at my watch. From the moment those fiber lines were severed to the moment we had a stable satellite connection, 2 minutes and 58 seconds. Not quite 3 minutes. Close enough to taste the sweet victory. I sprinted back inside, leaving a sputtering Carol to argue with Dave. The monitors in the ops room were flickering back to life. Data streams, like lifeblood returning to a wounded body, began to flow across the screens. The red, disconnected warnings vanished, replaced by the comforting glow of network activity. Jenna let out a whoop of relief. We're back. I've got their CEO on the satellite link. He looks like he's aged 10 years in the last half hour. I took a deep breath, the tension slowly bleeding out of my shoulders. We were back in the game. And all it took was bypassing the entire terrestrial internet infrastructure with a direct link to a satellite orbiting thousands of miles above the Earth. Take that. Bylaw 14, Section B, Paragraph 3. Take that and shove it in your Pantone Warm Gray 1C compliant. Well, you get the idea. The immediate crisis was averted, but I had a feeling my problems with Carol Peterson were far from over. The installation of a rather conspicuous satellite dish on my roof was probably not going to go unnoticed in the meticulously regulated world of Whispering Pines Estates. With the satellite link humming smoothly, the Aegis command team snapped back into their well-oiled routine. I took over the primary comms channel, my voice calm and authoritative despite the lingering adrenaline. Mr. Henderson, I said to the haggard-looking CEO of Global Petrologistics on the main screen. Can you hear me clearly? His face, pale and etched with worry just moments before, visibly relaxed. Alex, thank God. We were about to lose everything. Our backup systems were failing. Communications were completely down. We experienced a temporary connectivity issue," I said, carefully omitting the details of shovel-wielding HOA presidents. "But we have re-established a secure, high-bandwidth link. We are now initiating full failover to your Arizona data center. Everything is under control." The relief on Henderson's face was palpable. He stammered his thanks, promising us a substantial bonus and a glowing testimonial that would probably mention something about our unconventional problem-solving skills. Jenna efficiently coordinated the data transfer, her fingers flying across her keyboard, rerouting terabytes of critical information. Dave, his earlier panic replaced by a focused energy, monitored the network traffic, ensuring the integrity of the connection. Outside, through the reinforced glass of the ops room, I could still see Carol pacing furiously on her lawn, gesturing animatedly at the now prominent satellite dish on our roof. She looked like a disgruntled suburban Godzilla railing against a technological marvel she couldn't possibly comprehend. Let her rant, I thought. Her reign of terror had just encountered a force even more powerful than petty bylaws. The cold, uncaring vastness of space. Agent Thompson, the man in the impeccably tailored dark suit, listened to Carol's increasingly frantic accusations with the detached air of someone who deals with actual threats to national security on a daily basis. Sergeant Davis and Officer Miller stood beside him, looking like they'd rather be anywhere else. Carol, emboldened by the arrival of a genuine authority figure, albeit one far beyond the scope of her HOA jurisdiction, was in full flow, her voice rising to a near shriek. "Ugh! And this monstrous contraption appeared on his roof, without any permits. It's a clear violation of Article 5, Section C, regarding unapproved structures, and I have photographic evidence." She brandished her phone like a weapon. Thompson finally turned his gaze from the satellite dish to Carol, his expression giving absolutely nothing away. Then he addressed me, his voice calm but carrying an unmistakable air of authority. "Sir, you are the owner and operator of Aegis Command?" "That's correct," I confirmed, stepping forward. He flashed his badge again, this time holding it a fraction longer so everyone could get a good look. "Agent Thompson, FBI, Critical Infrastructure Protection." He gestured towards my building. "Your facility is registered with the Department of Homeland Security as a Tier 3 critical infrastructure asset, specifically within the financial services sector. The simultaneous loss of both your primary and secondary communication links triggered an automated alert within our system." The effect on Carol was immediate and almost comical. Her tirade stuttered to a halt, her self-righteous indignation replaced by a flicker of something akin to apprehension? Thompson turned his attention back to Carol, his gaze unwavering. "Ma'am, you stated that you severed the communication lines to this facility?" Carol, seemingly unable to back down even in the face of federal law enforcement, puffed up her chest. "I did! He was in clear violation of—" Thompson cut her off, his voice hardening slightly. "Ma'am, with all due respect, a violation of HOA bylaws is a matter for the Homeowners Association and potentially civil courts. However, knowingly and intentionally disrupting the communication infrastructure of a federally designated critical asset, that is a matter of federal law." He paused, letting the weight of his words sink in. Specifically, it could constitute a violation of Title 18, Section 1362 of the U.S. Code, malicious mischief regarding communication lines, stations, or systems. Given the federal designation of this facility, it could also be interpreted as interference with critical infrastructure. These are federal felonies, ma'am. Penalties can include significant fines and imprisonment. He glanced down at the shovel still resting on the grass, where Sergeant Davis had strategically placed it. "All over the color of a buried utility cover?" The color drained from Carol's face. Her mouth opened and closed silently, like a fish out of water. The heavy binder of HOA covenants slipped from her grasp and landed on the lawn with a soft, anticlimactic thud. She looked like she was about to spontaneously combust into a cloud of beige cardigan and righteous fury. I felt a fleeting pang of something that might have been pity, but it was quickly overwhelmed by a deep sense of satisfaction. Justice, it seemed, could sometimes arrive in the form of a calm FBI agent and the chilling recitation of federal statutes. Thompson informed Carol that she would be contacted by the U.S. Attorney's Office. He then turned to Sergeant Davis. "Sergeant, if you would please secure the instrument." Davis, with a barely perceptible smirk, picked up the shovel as if it were a highly dangerous piece of evidence. Officer Miller looked like he was trying very hard not to laugh. The remaining cleanup was anticlimactic. Agent Thompson had a brief, surprisingly informal chat with me inside Aegis Command, mostly asking about our security protocols and expressing a mild interest in our impromptu satellite backup system. He even jotted down the model number. With the federal implications hanging heavy in the suburban air, the HOA vice president, a nervous man named Mr. Henderson, no relation to our client, thankfully, arrived in a state of near apoplexy. He practically begged Gus to reconnect the severed fiber lines, promising him all the necessary authorizations and a lifetime supply of appropriately colored conduit covers. Gus, looking thoroughly bewildered by the entire chain of events, cheerfully obliged, splicing the cables back together with practiced ease. I made sure Gus received a rather generous bonus for his trouble. Back inside, Jenna informed me that our client, suitably impressed, and probably slightly terrified, by our ability to bounce back from what they now understood was a deliberate act of sabotage, had not only wired the promised bonus, but also wanted to significantly increase our retainer. As for the satellite dish, it was staying. I instructed Jenna to send a polite but firm letter to the HOA, informing them that Aegis Command had installed a redundant off-site communication system for business continuity purposes. We would, however, be happy to paint it in the officially approved shade of Pantone Warm Gray 1C, just to show there were no hard feelings. Later that evening, I found myself back in my office, the hum of the servers a comforting counterpoint to the now silent suburban night. I sipped my lukewarm coffee and gazed out at the roof. The satellite dish, a gleaming white beacon against the twilight sky, stood as a testament to a truly ridiculous day. It was more than just a backup communication system. It was a monument to the triumph of ingenuity over idiocy. They say good fences make good neighbors. I disagree. Good fences can be regulated. A private, high-bandwidth, geosynchronous satellite link? That, my friends, makes for very, very quiet neighbors. And as I scrolled through the incoming emails, including one from a very flustered Carol Peterson requesting an emergency meeting of the HOA board, I couldn't help but smile. Some battles, it seemed, were best fought from orbit.